I think you've all had time now to share your thoughts, at least to go on to that poll. And so I want to welcome you to this second session of the day. My name's Jane Clarke. I'm a professor of biophysical chemistry and in the university, well, an emerita professor of biophysical chemistry in the university, and at the moment my position is as president of Wolfson College. My contribution to health tech is that many people that have gone through my lab have worked in health tech around the Cambridge area and elsewhere, so I think this is a very important thing to say. What we can see in this Slido poll, are we seeing the slide? Well, we're not seeing it here. What we can see in the Slido poll is, oh, thank you. Developing policies and practices to support underrepresented groups. I guess that is the who. It seemed to me that when we were asking this question, it's got three processes. Who? I would think, what are we doing? Who are we? Who is doing it? But who are we delivering to? You know, what's our agenda, and where? You know, where are we doing this research? So I'd like to introduce the panel. We've got Manaz Javaid here, who is the EDI manager at the Judge Business School in Cambridge. Tarquin, I'm sorry, I'm doing the order in my thing. Bennett-Coles, who's the senior partner at Sci Partners, who are executive search specialists, so bringing people into the health tech industry. Paul Deemer, who's head of D&I at NHS Employees. And Siwan Smith, who is EDI manager at ARUP, which is a global engineering design company. So it's interesting to me that when we have this panel, we're bringing in experts in EDI, and I'm really impressed that we've got a session on EDI. So the first question that I'm asking you, and it may change the poll here, is actually, oh, and I would remind you their full biographies are on the website and in the notes, so you can find out about them. What I'd really like to ask you, the same question, do you define EDI in the workplace? Shall we start with you, Tarquin?
Yeah, well, for me in the recruitment sector, and particularly in the international recruitment sector, it's about, as I say, it's about making sure that we increase the breadth of perspective and skills from as many different backgrounds, places, organisations as possible. And I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but one of the things that we've seen is the improvement in measuring that. So organisations measuring how they go to market, the sort of diversity of the people who come back to them, and how we can therefore put things in place that drive the right behaviours. This is a really important issue, and there are certain places in the world that are a few years ahead of us, but certainly within the academic setting and crossing over in industry, there is an improvement that is developing out there in the market. So, you know, for me, I think it's about making sure organisations have the structures for hiring in place that will enable them to have a diverse and therefore successful partnership with the people coming in.
Thank you. Siwan?
So for me, I'd say, you know, it's anything to do with people. People are fundamentally at the heart of EDI. You touch upon them in every aspect of the workplace, whether that's through HR, recruitment, whether it's through the way that you design and processes products or services, and how they interact with people, and actually who your suppliers are. Further than that, you know, absolutely everything in the workplace comes down to you will have people who use it, you will have people that manage processes, manage policies, manage procedures, but you also have people that will be affected by something that you do in the workplace or wider society. So for me, always coming back to that, people being at the heart of things, making sure that things are fair, that opportunities are there for people, and that you're listening and hearing what they say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And completely agree with what Tarquin and Siwan has said. And for me as well, just to build on that, it's about that health inequalities bit as well. And I know that will interest this audience, hopefully. Ultimately, it is about staff representation. I mean, the NHS constitution, so the NHS has a constitution, if you weren't aware, and one of its core principles is that the workforce should reflect the communities that it serves. But more than that, I think the outcomes, because at the end of the day, the NHS is an industry like any other industry. It has to perform and it has outputs. The outputs is your and my health. That's ultimately. And ultimately, in that respect, in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion, what we want to try and do is ensure that those health outcomes are equal. We hear a lot about health inequalities between different communities, different groups, and also I was interested in the conversation this morning about regions. You know, you look at some of the regional variations in terms of health outcomes. That's why we need to focus on equality, diversity and inclusion.
Thank you. Finally?
Absolutely, I would say it's about your people, your stakeholders. So just building in terms of how it affects your service users, your customers, your partners, for example. And also we have, I think we're going to have a slide coming up about an exercise that we've carried out at the business school where we've asked our stakeholders, our staff, our faculty, our alumni, students, to define what does EDI mean to them. So this is what we have. But I think it's absolutely about staying relevant as an organization to people, especially the upcoming generations, who have very different expectations around EDI and what an organization, what kind of policies they have and processes to support around EDI. And just one final point. The first point was about underrepresented groups. I think EDI, in some aspect, applies to everyone, whether you're from an underrepresented group or the majority group.
Thank you, thank you. So what I mean, we saw on the screen, in heartening, most people thought everything. You know, 75% of you thought all the aspects were important. But what I really like to ask you about, you to consider really is, why does EDI particularly matter in the healthcare sector? What happens when it works well? And more importantly, maybe, or maybe not more importantly, but if it doesn't work well, what are the consequences? Should we start with you?
Yeah, I mean,
please.
For me, it's very clear actually. I work for NHS Employers, which is an organisation that supports human resources directors across all of the hospitals and health trusts and ambulance services around England. And ultimately, the reason why we want to integrate equality, diversity and inclusion into our practices is that we want fair outcomes, as I say. In terms of representation, you're absolutely right. The important thing for the NHS to remember is that we are an organisation of 1.3 million staff. So we are, I think, around the 6th largest employer in the world. Yeah. So in that respect, and we're certainly the largest employer in Europe. So in that respect, to answer your question, Jane, in terms of why is it important, we are the leader in this. We've got to be the leader in this. You know, we represent that number of staff across the country, and all of those staff have got family members as well. So the NHS is, you know, a huge representation, hopefully, of the UK. And if we're going to represent the UK, then we've got to represent the UK in all of its shapes and forms. So we've got to have diversity across the piece and across the whole piece as well. Because remember, when we talk about diversity, and we talk about, because it's all based on the Equality Act. So the Equality Act has got 9 protected characteristics in it. So it's a huge spectrum that we're trying to represent across the NHS, but we've got to do it because we are, as I say, almost a microcosm, if you like, of the UK, really.
And I mean, are there any sort of examples where you think, where we know, or we know at the moment, which are the most urgent examples where inequality in the NHS is failing?
Yeah, I mean, we know, for example, around it's a very odd. I think I've always said the NHS is a very odd organisation in one respect. If you look at gender, 80% of our workforce is female. 20% is male. Now, lots of people might say, well, that's good, isn't it? Well, it is good on some levels, but actually if you then look at how that plays itself out in terms of the organisations, we get this pyramid effect. And what happens is you might have that representation around the bottom, but as you get higher up the organisations, it gets less and less so. We actually have quite good representation at board level, actually. We've got about 50-50 representation, male and female. But if you use that equation in terms of ethnicity, for example, again, you've got that pyramid effect. So we're actually, as a 1.3 million group, we are very well represented in terms of black minority ethnic staff. But actually, again, if you go up the pyramid, it becomes less and less.
Thank you. Siwan, you've got a lot of experience in a lot of different industries.
I have
looking forward to hearing your answer
a lot
to
of
this.
different industries, and I think one of the things that should be said around the NHS in particular is it is a public sector organisation. It has a public sector duty to make sure its services are accessible to everybody. Now, the disabled community, old community, you know, the elderly community, sometimes the services are not always available. So one important aspect of EDI that the NHS absolutely should be looking at is accessibility all of the time. But going further, you know, building on some examples, and I can give you a personal example. At the age of 23, I was diagnosed with a brain tumour. For 3 years before that, I was told excessively, lose weight, your symptoms will clear up. Lose weight, it will clear up. You'll be fine. It's a PCOS. You'll be fine. It's a women's problem issue. It wasn't. It was a brain tumour. And I was left for 3 years because doctors do not see past you being a woman sometimes or you being overweight sometimes. And before I had my brain tumour, I wasn't overweight. That was a symptom of it. And despite the fact that I excessively told my doctor that I've put on weight, I've been putting on weight, I'm not eating anything, I'm going to the gym 4 hours every single day, that I wasn't believed. And weight bias is still one of the biggest biases that exists within the UK. All other biases we are starting to chip away at, but weight bias is getting worse.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, hard to follow that. Thank you, Siwan, for sharing that. I was going to say, I think it's always good to quote Einstein occasionally, but he talked about problems cannot be solved with the same mindset that created them. And we're looking at a brave new world with this, this is Connect Health Tech. We're talking about life sciences, academia, industry, all combining to deal with some of the great issues of our time. And that includes, I've got 2 teenagers, they are both on the neurodiverse side. They need medication to control that, and I've seen their behaviours and things play out. And that's another thing that, if we're talking about EDI, we need to consider as well, is about how we embrace diversity in all of its sort of flavours moving forward. So I think, from looking at where we are now here, it's about within an organisation implanting a seed, sometimes from the top down, and if not, then from the bottom up, where we embrace diversity. Because actually diversity leads to, and we've got evidence to support this with, Deloitte have done work on this, McKinsey, better results for companies, better commercial success, and so on. So it's all about implanting that early. There's an elephant in the room for me that, if you look at my name, and, here I am, stale male pale as it were, I know I have privilege. I was, fortunate enough to be born in a country where I had certain opportunities. And I see my job, and part of the reason I think I'm on this panel, is to act as an advocate to support some of the voices that don't have the opportunities that I've had. I started out as a teacher, stumbled into recruitment, went on a personal journey in between. My mother was the only female DJ in the gay clubs of LA before she passed away from HIV/AIDS. And I was out there in the States advocating for her, advocating for support for people with those illnesses. And I just share that because actually, I feel really passionate about this. And we've all got to be careful occasionally with EDI about not, judging the book by its cover, as it were. So my goal is to get in those organizations that I work with and say, what are you doing to address EDI right now? And what can we do to support you to make the right choices?
Thank you. Manaz, do you want to talk a little bit about why it's important? You're in the business school, so
and I work with Accelerate Cambridge, which is for startup and new ventures. And basically, we get probably about, I would say, over 50% of those new startup candidates are working around health tech, health products, for example, apps. And I think when it's not integrated, there's a risk element in terms of exacerbating the health inequalities that we are aware of. They're going to become worse. And I think even from a global point of view, we are very, very aware about the inequities. And if we're not designing products which are usually, an app, I think, would probably be for a global sort of audience or a global customer base. If we're not applying the EDI thinking, then we're going to be embarrassed because, for example, our sensors for a soap dispenser or the entrance or exit might not work for certain communities. And it's not because someone has deliberately done that. It's because they haven't applied the EDI thinking or they haven't thought about the unconscious biases. So in terms of benefits, I think it's saving the organization from having to go back and spend and reinvest money in trying to correct mistakes which were not deliberate in the first place, but because that EDI thinking wasn't applied. So in terms of a business point of view, it costs you more when you've got to go back and rectify things.
And how do you think that this is a message? I mean, we've got people here sort of in the health tech industry, people in business. How do we get that message across to business that it is to their benefit that EDI is built in, not just in recruitment, but in all stages of their thinking, their design of their business? How would you think about it?
So have the EDI input and develop the EDI thinking right from the beginning of your venture, for example, or the project that you are working on, and get the commitment from the leadership, whether it's your leadership or whether it's around the funding, for example. So really, really looking at the business case. I do, and I think as an EDI professional, I lean more towards the business case for EDI in terms of managing that risk. And not having to go back and rectify. It's a lot more easier to create the EDI thinking at the beginning of a project or an organization's journey. And I always see EDI as a journey. There's going to be different stages that an organization or a project will have to surpass to have that EDI thinking and to apply that thinking.
Thank you. Because Siwan, you've worked in a lot of different places, and it seems to me when in places I go and you see the EDI and they go, oh yeah, okay, we're going to have a session about that. How have you found working with, catching on this thing, working with people at different levels of the company, with directors, to really make it be something other than lip service?
I think for me, the best people within organisations that get it the most are the people who don't think that they know much about EDI. The ones who go in, I know everything, I'm an expert in this. And I mean, I am an EDI professional, but even I will know, I don't know information about this. I know I need to seek further information on this because I'm aware of that. The people who go in and go, I've read an article, I know exactly how it needs to be implemented, and how it's going to all turn out, and that's going to be the end of it. They're potentially the worst people to work with in organisations because there's no wider thinking. It's all their perspective. It's all based on somebody else's research and that one piece of research that they might have done and not the broader picture. And going back to that innovation element, I used to work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and there's the questions, just embedding questions into your everyday processes. So, who am I speaking to? Who am I not speaking to? Why am I not speaking to them? And really question that in depth, because some of particularly for any entrepreneurs in the room, some of your biggest targets and consumers and customers will likely be ones that you haven't initially thought of. They'll be the sectors and the people that actually need it the most and will link in with that the most. I mean, if you take the example of Play-Doh, that came about because a soap company was trying to create a product to get stains off wallpaper. It worked to a certain degree, but actually one of the inventors of it circulated it around to a primary school teacher, and she said, do you know what, the kids would love this, absolutely love it. Took it into school. Now, would you go and buy Play-Doh to rub stains off wallpaper? What's the market for that? To every child playing every day. You know, the market is just so different.
Can I just say, I'm
Please
thinking
do.
about Colin's sticky snot, was it you called it earlier today?
For taking stains off wallpaper, or
Maybe.
I was
well, you
also-
have your input because you work with a lot of companies, presumably as a sort of consultant.
And I was thinking about what you said about leadership, and it's having different conversations with different parts of the leadership. So for finance, you want to have a compelling, cost analysis of why it's better to have EDI within your planning. For the CEO, it might be a conversation about it will give you a competitive edge. For some of the team, it's about, again, networks, is that if you've got a cross-functional group and people with, we had I think the phrase earlier in one of the first was a multifaceted careers, international experiences. Their connections, their global connections, and we're in a global marketplace, are really valuable. So it's having slightly different conversations with different people within an organisation, so you're speaking the same language, so they will implement what you're talking about. Because if you get everybody on board, and you need to create trust to do that, that's when you'll get that proper change, rather than just, as you said, somebody who comes up with some form that gets sent out to everyone to read once and then disappears into a locked cupboard somewhere. So you've really got to drive that. And then when you've got advocates, make sure they're out there regular basis saying, are we doing this? Is the language for our recruitment advert, is that representative of the sort of people we want to hire? We did a study when I worked at AstraZeneca, and we actually got a software change so we could adapt our adverts so it would appeal to a much wider representative group of the sort of people we want to bring into the company, rather than just saying, let's just redo the same job advert we had for the person who was there before. So.
And I'd like to get some insights, when we start with you, please, about how you get, you could recruit, you have a recruitment team, get a great, but how do you get sort of the team leaders? Within sort of biotech, you can have, AstraZeneca, you can have great head decisions about this, but how you get leaders within teams, individual stakeholders within an organisation to actually buy in to the EDI, the value of diversity and inclusion in their teams, and how to manage that. Let's try, within academia for starters, and then, or within businesses.
It's about having a goal around EDI, or a commitment or an aspiration, and someone, it could be your EDI champion, for example, if there isn't anyone who's doing this as their sort of like daytime job, to really champion that cause and align the aim around, or the aspiration around EDI with the organization's, for example, the business school's overall strategy for the next 5 or 6 years. So how does EDI fit in with that? And also, I think EDI is about change. So finding the change agents, for example. So if we have an EDI committee, for example, and on our committee we have the HR director, for example, we have the director for communications and corporate marketing and communications, because communications is such an important element around EDI. How do we communicate the change? And I cannot emphasize enough, and I think I'm not, even though I emphasize this message, I might not be listened enough, the role of the line manager. The role of the line manager, for example, in academia, it might be the principal investigator, for example, the team leader. What kind of training and discussions are being had with the line manager, because they are the face of the organization, and they are the person, for example, if you have a new recruit who's going to interact with the line manager. And I think just investing in line management training around EDI and conscious bias, for example, developing inclusive leadership is so important for the line managers, because they are dealing with people on the ground, for example, and then they are dealing with the leaders. So relaying messages to the leaders of that organization. So yes, absolutely, invest in your line managers.
Okay.
Yeah. Training is absolutely crucial. We talk about organisational culture. Culture is made up of 1 million behaviours, and it's often manifested best and worst, actually, by our managers. They've got a really important role in any organisation. So training for line managers is really important. And But the training isn't just about EDI. Even though I'm called, my title is Head of Diversity and Inclusion, I try not to use those words actually too much. I very much align with what Tarquin was saying. It's about language. And we've heard this morning as well here, the presentations that we've seen. A lot of the talk has been about common language, across collaborators, across stakeholders. And it's the same with diversity and inclusion within an organisation as well. It's about using the right language and using the language that resonates with your audience. And when it comes to recruitment as well, actually, Jane, you said it, I think. How can we do this? You use the word value. How can we get value? It's about values. We talk in the NHS about recruiting for values. So what we're doing now, we're changing the whole recruitment process. So there used to be, I'm talking a long time ago now. When I had started work, anyway, there was a standard question at interview, like, how do you describe equal opportunities? That was the standard question that used to get asked. And you used to get the standard responses as well. It's very rarely mentioned now at interview. What we do is we describe what diversity and inclusion is in terms of our values. And we describe that to the applicant, and we give them scenarios, and we say to them, how would you respond? And that's how you and that's how you judge people now, and that's how you assess people in terms of a recruitment process. So that's what we do. We recruit for values within organisations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and EDI isn't just assessed within recruitment processes. It's assessed within procurement bids, within grant funding bids. It's assessed everywhere now. If you don't have even the kind of vaguest understanding of it, or you're not thinking about how that impacts on your business, then there's so many opportunities that you're limiting. Likewise, if you don't understand how your behaviour impacts on other people, you're limiting your career opportunities right there and then by not really taking heart, really trying to understand wider society, that people are different, and how we get along, how we work with each other, how we express ourselves in a way that is, beneficial for more than just yourself in all of these kind of situations. So I think it's really important to understand that it's embedded in everything. And from a workplace perspective, I'd always say, look around at what systems and processes are in place. Start there, start building that out, ask questions, why do we do it this way? Is that the best way? Who benefits from that? Who doesn't benefit? Who is it really hard system and process for? And how can we make it better? Don't say, how can we fix it? How can we make it better and start making incremental changes? Because you'll never get to a point where you'll fix it for absolutely everyone.
Thank you, that's useful. And I'm aware we want to have some discussions, so we've got about 2 minutes left. I'd like to ask you, if there are young entrepreneurs or older entrepreneurs in the audience, people about to start off, they've got an idea of something they'd like to do, how would you suggest that they might get that toolbox? How would they learn about this? So, to get that first.
I think there are two ways. One is you seek out someone with those skills. Either you bring in an expert, you look at people on the panel today, can I get them in to talk to us about it? Or you train someone up if you don't have the skills within the organisation. And I think, for new entrepreneurs, it's thinking about who can I bring in to add to the suite of skills and awareness of these issues now, so that the culture will grow around the right values and right principles that we want to create. Because actually, and it came up this morning, I think the younger generation are better at this, for a lot of this. They're being exposed to more things in the media about EDI, about inclusion, about the change of the way things are addressed. So if we can tap into that too, the people coming through who are already more comfortable having the difficult conversations that someone of my age might struggle with at a dinner table, then let's bring those as part of that conversation so it's embedded from the start.
Thank you, Paul, and then...
Can I just say, I completely agree, because, I defy anybody who says, I don't understand diversity. I don't get that, it's everywhere. It's all around you. You've only got to read the news, watch Britain's Got Talent, watch Strictly Come Dancing. You know, it's on there. Diversity's there in front of you. That's what it is. So,
but my colleagues, okay, I know, sorry, I'm not supposed to have
they
an
don't
opinion.
watch Strictly, no?
No, but my colleagues in the chemistry department, when they appoint yet another man, would say, oh, but we did want, but we're recruiting the best. So how can we change this mindset that says the best looks like me? Look at the mirror. I'm successful. That's what I need to re-recruit. There's your challenge.
Can I quickly, sorry.
Yes,
apologies,
do.
jump in? So the college I used to be at, Homerton College, had just recruited the first, black principal for, the Oxbridge colleges, Lord Simon Woolley. That was a brilliant example.
He's not the first principal. He would like to think he was, but actually Sunita Elaine is. Okay. There we go. I'm sorry. It's easy for a man to stand up and say, I'm the first black person, ignoring the black woman in the room.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Just mentioning that.
And it's important you do, so thank you. But the principle applies for the principles, that it's top down. So that's again, just an example about if you change that leadership, it changed the role modelling and the direction of the conversations. Apologies, Siwan.
Sure.
So you need to be asking the questions as well. So why do I think that? What is it about the way that I understand the world to be the best way for this? And actually, if you're not creating that bit of conflict within your organisation, who's challenging your thought processes, who's actually inspiring you to do and be better all of the time? And there's two pieces of research I'm going to pick up here. So one is by researchers Hong and Page, and they brought together really high academic achievers and then a diverse group. And whilst the high academic achievers achieved the solution first, the actual more diverse group achieved a better solution overall. And then that was backed up by the Boston Consulting Group, who ran a piece around innovation specifically, and said that actually academic background has no bearing on innovation. And I know we're sitting in Cambridge, one of the most prestigious universities in the whole of the UK. But actually, if you're just thinking along them lines of, well, they went to Cambridge, they went to Oxford, they went to here, so they must be the best. Are you actually expanding that sphere to understand different ways of thinking, different life experiences, to challenge your preconceived ideas?
You've got the last word before I go out.
So in terms of resources and how can an organisation or entrepreneurs in particular, for example, improve their sort of confidence or competence level around EDI, there's plenty of resources out there. There's books. I always quote my favourite books. I did a diploma in HR, so before the pandemic, I struggled to find EDI-related material which really sort of hit the note. There wasn't enough resources, but now when I look at EDI material, there's plenty out there. And this is probably a post-pandemic positive outcome, because there's been a lot more discussion. And yes, please talk to your children or your nephews or nieces. And just one last sort of piece of, not advice, but I suppose just a thought is that what's being taught in schools is not really matching up with organisations and what organisations' ideology is around EDI, for example. And this is going to be a really, really big challenge when the younger generations go into organisations to work. They're not going to agree. There's going to be a big conflict. And I see this already happening with the Gen Zs. And younger people are more bold. If they don't like something, they're going to walk away from the jobs. And we all, we're in a country where there is a big recruitment shortage. So EDI, just in terms of the mismatch, I think it's very, very unfair. We teach our children in schools or at home around EDI, but we're not going to provide the EDI thinking or apply that in reality in their workplaces.
Thank you. I'm going to stop now because I'm aware, well, we started late, so I'm going to allow us a bit longer. Are there any questions in the room? Are there any questions from our... One from online. Could you like to... Yeah, sure. Because we haven't had an online question yet, so that would be great. Thank you. The question is, how can we take a more intersectional approach to EDI? I mean, stats often look at specifics, like number of women and whatever, but we need to look at this intersection, which can create even more barriers. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
I think,
Can I?
yeah, go on.
All right. I was
Yeah, please.
I mean, Siwan mentioned earlier the public sector equality duty, and I think that's actually a good lesson in how you can look at this intersectionally. So the public sector equality duty is a provision under the Equality Act, which says actually that public sector bodies need to go a bit further and do a bit more in terms of equality. And what it talks about, I'll talk about it from a legal perspective, it talks about due regard. And I think that's a really good term. It's a good way to think, actually, about diversity. So it's due regard. Because I don't think you want to think about it in terms of boxes. You know, I think too often what we do is we get into a numbers game. I mean, representation is important, and we've got to be mindful of that. And we know that we're looking to ultimately have organisations that reflect the communities that we serve. But it's very easy to get locked into a numbers game. I think for me, it's about thinking about this across the piece. I think the panel have given very good examples of why and how we should do that. And that is about thinking about this as a holistic thing. So again, picking up on what colleagues have said, you know, what type of organisation do you want to be? You know, and what do you want to represent to your audience and to your customers and your business? And that's the way to think about this. And that is an intersectional, just to explain to people, it's about thinking about all these things. So you're not just one thing. You're not just an ethnicity. You're not just an age. You're not just a gender. You're not just a sexual orientation. You're not just a religion. We're all of those things. Everybody in this room is all of those things. And you're an age as well. I'm of an age. I know that. You know, and I thought the children, can I just say the children thing was really interesting. I saw a lovely tweet this morning from a colleague. He had a party at the weekend and he overheard his 7-year-old grandson. He was talking to one of the guests at the party, and his grandson said to the man, he said, "What do you do?" And the man said, "I'm a dentist." And the 7-year-old said, "Well, you can't be because you're eating chocolate."
I'm going to move us on there to see if there's any questions from the floor. There's one here, please, at the front. If you'd maybe tell us who you are, then that would be useful. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Yu Dan. I was working at the MRC LMB as a scientist. I particularly want to ask you whether the EDI can improve the situation for women scientists, especially we're facing the biological, physical situation if we would like to have children in a reasonable young age, which the pregnancy and the breastfeeding is not replaceable and better not to be replaced. So I want to hear your thoughts over it. Thank you.
Yes, please.
In my, a former organisation where I worked, it was based around examinations in China, travelling, and there was a big push around we need more female examiners, for example, and my response would be to the management, "Oh yes, but do you actually realise females come with wombs? You know, they come with wombs. I sometimes describe, and I shouldn't, my children as baggage. Yes, I came along with baggage, and do you think it's possible for me to recommend to a former colleague, for example, or to a friend, come along to this job where you've got to travel, for example, extensive travel, staying overnight, away from your family, you know, having that thinking, and that particular organisation was able to increase the number of females, but it required a lot of thinking. And because it was a new project, there were 3 or 4 pregnancies, like one after the other. But just in terms of the overhaul of the policy change, really made it easier for that organisation to manage, for example, and support, not to manage, but I suppose support families. So it's about changing the policies to really support your families and having the discussion with the people who it applies to. There's no point in a leader saying, "Oh, this is a policy change we're going to have around supporting families or parents," when that might not work for the parent. Just to talk, have a discussion and talk to people.
I'm going to cut these short because I'm aware of the time. I'll let you all have a go and you can come back at the question you weren't asked to address, because I've got a big question to ask. Are there any other questions? There's one at the back. Thank you. We do need to give the audience a chance.
Hi, my name's Shafiq Ahmed from the Energy IRC in Cambridge. So this is a general question about the latest data that shows that a lot of this sort of unconscious bias training doesn't actually lead to any significant changed behaviour And also, I did have a second point, how to prevent this sort of tick box exercise where a lot of these EDI practices are, look good on paper, but doesn't lead to better practices on the ground.
Can I grab this?
Yes, you may grab that one.
Because actually it follows nicely with the double conversation. So one of the things that I remember even as a teacher, which was differentiation is about treating people differently to treat them the same. But putting in resources and ideas, and I worked with a great HR director, and she put in a system where there was the elements of leave across the business that could be taken for whether it was menopause, whether it was fertility, whether it was relating to elderly parents, sick children, all sorts of things that anybody could gain access to within that organisation. So they all had the opportunity to be able to take that time out and still return to work without people asking questions about what it was and so on. So it was creating a set of resources, and I think that's a way of overcoming that. Just giving a discrete training program and everyone going, I've done it, tick, few, I've done the IC security, tick, done. You're right, it doesn't work, and the evidence shows that. So it's got to be right in there, but it needs to be seen to be beneficial for most of the organisation who can take that, rather than then a situation where someone goes, well, that's not fair. If I'm not able to have children, why should they be able to have that time off when I can't? Why can they have that? So creating systems and processes that takes into account all of those different factors.
Can I just say on the unconscious bias?
Very quickly, because I want more things on.
Yeah, so with the unconscious bias training, I think the research, or why this fails, it's because organizations take approach, oh yeah, let's have this EDI unconscious bias training, 3-hour training, and then let's go and forget about it, because now I don't have any biases. It doesn't work like that. It needs to be systematic, it needs to apply to all of your areas, and there needs to be a check and balance in terms of 6 months later, what has been the follow-up around unconscious bias.
So, is there any other questions?
Just one over there.
Sorry, yes, sorry, I can't see. Apologies.
Lady in the green.
So thank you.
There isn't much.
No.
That was really thought-provoking, and actually you challenged some of my own biases, and I won't look at Tarquin in the same way again now. That was really interesting. But I guess for those of us who are involved in selection, so selection for accelerator programs or selection for people in our teams, I understand that we can generate values that will then increase diversity in applications, but what I really struggle with is getting that diversity of applications in the first place to those kinds of programs. Has the panel got any tips on that?
Yeah, you go first.
So I used to run the Women in Innovation and Young Innovators programme for Innovate UK, and the way that we did it was we looked at grassroots organisations. We went and worked with Foundervine, with LMF females, with UK Black Tech, with all kinds of different organisations that were really in the heart of the communities, because you have to remember, and we felt it very closely at KTN, actually we weren't getting a lot of black entrepreneurs coming and asking for support because our organisation perspective was very white. So they didn't feel safe, they didn't feel comfortable, they didn't feel like it was a welcoming space to them. So by us going to them instead of them coming to us, we started to break down that barriers and started to offer kind of more of our services. And then we started to challenge the rest of the organisation. Who are you speaking to? How are you reaching out to wider communities? How are you leveraging that? And a big piece of work that we did around Women in Innovation was just to ask them, where did you find out about this? Who do you regularly get communications from? If you were to look for grant funding, where would you go? And started to build that into our programmes and that into our communication channels.
I'm just going to very quickly go into the communities that are underrepresented. Go there, be present, be seen and heard, so people can relate to you as an employer.
Are there any more questions? We've got time for one more question. There was one there.
Can I just, while you're doing that, can I just build on that as well, just to say, that outreach piece is very important. Don't forget communications again, social media, that's where people are seeing you. That's where they're looking for you and where they're looking for jobs. You've got to give the right messaging as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So last quick question. I'm Jenny from Stockholm, by the way. Targets. What do we think about targets? Do we love them? Do we hate them? Is it helpful? Does it drive the right behaviours and culture?
Okay, we'll start at the end and we're going to work this way. Tarquin.
Certainly, I'd say in the commercial world, having some targets is a good place to start. Yes, it does drive behaviours. And if you were to say to a recruitment partner, if you don't find me X or Y, you won't get the fee you're expecting, that drives different behaviours. So I think actually some targets are good. But again, they have to be measurable. You know, it's the old SMART analogy. But as long as there's a way of actually tracking that through and making sure they're doing things in the right way and representing in the right way, then I think actually targets are a great place to start.
Okay, that was yes, I think.
There's a big misapprehension between targets and quotas. I don't agree with quotas at all. Targets are due. You have targets in every aspect of business. It helps you move the dial forwards. It helps you question why you're not achieving that. So in terms of EDI, you do need that target. In terms of ARUP's organisation, we have gender aspirations, so we've rephrased the name, and that's helped us put more females into leadership positions, not because they're getting put into leadership positions, because we're asking the right questions at the right times and organising the processes in a fairer way.
Thank you.
Well, Jane, I wouldn't dare sit with an audience like this and say data's not important. Yeah, data is important, absolutely important. But what's more important is how you disaggregate that data, how you analyse that data. So the most meaningful data that we get in the NHS is we have a staff survey every year. It's completed by over 500,000 staff. I mean, like I said, we're 1.3 million. Over 500,000 staff complete that survey. The most interesting data is when you compare the responses. So you compare the responses between black and white staff, compare the responses between disabled and non-disabled staff, and compare responses between heterosexual and gay and lesbian staff. You'll see the variations of experience then within your organisation. So yes, data is important, and on that you can build targets, yeah, but you need to know what the data is telling you first before you decide what your targets are, not just random targets.
Thank you.
I'm just going to say one word, well, a bit more. Targets need to be realistic. So I'm not against targets, and I can discuss this with you over lunch, for example, in terms of why I'm saying this, but make them realistic and be able to justify or find a reasoning for why you weren't able to reach 1 or 2 targets. And that gives you more headlines around EDI.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for coming. I've learned one thing, you can't count. That wasn't more than one word. Being a scientist, I understand about counting, but you're very welcome. No, it was really important. I want to say thank you to everybody. There were more questions I would have liked to ask, but thank you also for putting this as one of the key issues here, because the talent that we're wasting in this country through not having diverse recruitment. And just to challenge, just because I do, this idea that people in Cambridge are not diverse. The college I'm in has 42% of my students would define themselves as white. Mm-hmm. Over 65% of our students are from overseas, and we have students from 98 different countries. So when we think about healthcare and sustainability, we get those different points of view. And my big deal thing, well, I was a bit disappointed that so few said, I think if you have diverse teams, you get better research. And that's why I think it's really important. So Chairman gets the last word. But I'm really grateful to you all for coming. It was a great discussion, and thank you all for being here. Thank you.